important thing for India is right now is to address the issue of mistreatment of Indian citizens.
Correct.
Yes, there is an SOP, and SOP is not etched in stone. India will try to has to take that conversation first internally and have this conversation with the US, with the Americans, and sort of make them understand that we can reduce the tariffs, but we need to have it on a reciprocal basis.
मेरे दोस्त प्रेसिडेंट डोनाल्ड ट्रंप,
My true friend, Prime Minister Modi.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is done with his French trip and is now headed to the United States to meet US President Donald Trump, and it's a very big deal. Why? Because it's happening super early and super fast. This is probably the first time that an Indian Prime Minister is visiting an American president so early in his term. What's on the agenda? Well, tariffs, immigration, probably China, and a lot of handshakes, I'm sure. And to decode all this, to break it down for us, we are joined by the Indian Express's diplomatic editor, Shubhajit Roy. Hello, Shubhajit, welcome. Let's talk about Trump and Modi, because it's happening pretty early in Trump's second term, just the fourth week. He's met already three world leaders. What's this hurry to meet Trump? Why is Modi in such a hurry to meet Trump?
Well, the Indian strategic calculus is that, if you meet him early, you can manage some of the difficult conversations that are likely to arise in the second term of the Trump administration. As we have seen in the first few weeks, that Trump has been very aggressive on the immigration agenda.
Right.
We saw that with the deportation of 104 Indians and Indians who have been also deported. Other countries, nationals have been deported from Colombia, from Mexico, from Guatemala, El Salvador. So the Indian assessment is that to give a chance for the top level leadership to have a conversation, face-to-face conversation, so that the issues like mistreatment of Indians, when they were brought back, they were brought back with handcuffs and and shackles in the legs. Those things can be addressed,
Right.
because India did register some concerns on these mistreatment, and India doesn't want that to recur.
Right.
So to address those challenges, India wants to have a conversation between Prime Minister Modi and US President Trump. The second thing is about obviously the issue of tariffs, which President Trump, as he says tariff, the most beautiful word in the English dictionary.
Yes.
He has threatened tariffs against India, called India a tariff king, a
Yes.
big abuser of high tariffs. So from that perspective as well, the Indian government would want to have a very candid conversation on how to address those concerns.
Right.
Overall, I think the strategic issues of how to deal with the global powers, major powers, which I'm sure we will discuss.
Definitely.
And so last time when President Trump came to power, India took 5 months to visit, which was, even by that standard, it was considered very early. Within 5 months of a new US president visiting the White House, and I was there at that particular visit.
Oh, really?
In June 2017, when he went for the visit to White House and met President Trump at that point of time. And I remember seeing the two leaders together, and there were a lot of hugs that were done at the White House Rose Gardens, where the two leaders came out and addressed, and there was Melania Trump, there were US NSA HR McMaster at that point of time, also Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, they were there. So I had the opportunity to see that how personal chemistry after that shaped the relationship and really smoothened the atmosphere between the two leaders, and that resulted in later in the year strategic convergence on Indo-Pacific, on China, and all of that. So I think overall, for atmospherics, for smoothening the conversation, this personal chemistry might help, might work. So I think it's a gamble, it's an opportunity that the Indian government is willing to make.
We'll definitely see in the days to come how the gamble plays out. Now, you mentioned immigration. Of course, that's going to be first on the agenda, I hope. 104 Indian immigrants who were transported back to India, and we all saw the horrific visuals of them being in shackles, bonded, not being allowed to use the washrooms. In a C-17 Globemaster, they were brought back. Now, the entire narrative is the fact that US deportation SOPs are generally centered around this. They have their own rules set in place. But how do you think Modi will broach this conversation, how to make it better? Because there are still more than 239 immigrants who are supposed to return. So how do you think that Modi will be calling out Trump on this shackle issue?
Well, just to put this deportation 104 in perspective, there are about 350,000 Indian students. Of the 70% of the H-1B visa professionals, about 70% of them are Indians, and there are about 7.25 lakh Indians who are illegal immigrants in the United States,
right,
as per the government data.
Right.
Now, what we have seen is that about 20,000 have been identified or earmarked as who have exhausted the options and are ready to be deported, of which about 200 plus have been confirmed and 400 plus are, their verification is underway.
Right.
So, when you really see in the last 15 years,
Right,
there are about 15,000 Indians have been deported since 2009. In the first 4 years Trump term, between 2017 to 2020,
right,
in those 4 years, 6,500 out of the total 15,000 that have been deported were deported.
okay,
So you can see a large chunk were deported in the last term of Trump administration.
correct,
So Trump this time is much more aggressive,
very aggressive.
and maybe this number would go up more than 6,500, safe to say, assume that.
Okay,
It still is not anywhere close to the 20,000 identified as ready to be deported, right? So it depends on the capacity, it depends on how the US government is able to use its resources, or it wants India to send planes to bring back its illegal Indian immigrants. So all that has to be worked out.
Correct.
But important thing for India is right now is to address the issue of mistreatment of Indian citizens.
correct,
Yes, there is an SOP that the US immigration authorities, US border patrol, they follow, and they followed in the last time, and they said that the use of restraint has been followed since 2012,
Right.
which is about 13 years now,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Since last years of UPA government in India and the Obama administration back then, and then Biden administration, Trump administration, they have all followed the same SOP. Having said that, an SOP is not etched in stone. Indian government can take up the issue that SOPs can be changed, because yes, I am ready to take back the illegal Indians, but they should be treated humanely.
yeah,
So I think the challenge is to convince President Trump that they are illegal Indians, but to treat them as gangsters and criminals, all of them, to treat them as such is being unfair.
Correct.
So I think that is the kind of nuanced conversation that has to happen with the team, and there the Indian government, Prime Minister Modi, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, NSA Ajit Doval, Indian Ambassador Vinay Quatra, all of them and their counterparts will have this conversation that you can send back illegal immigrants, but don't handcuff them.
Correct.
I think that is a very fair ask
Very fair ask.
from a friend and a strategic partner like India.
Absolutely.
And that is, I think, will be the broader framework of the conversation. How Prime Minister Modi takes it up, we have to see. We have to see the public statements. We have to see whether they talk about it in public domain or they only talk about it in closed doors. But but this is one of the important conversations I think they will have to have at the White House.
Absolutely, Shubhajit. You're right to say that SOPs are not etched in stone, and it's only a fair ask that the illegal migrants are treated fairly. Moving on to the tariffs that we were talking about, Trump has called India, like you mentioned, a tariff king, big abuser of tariffs. How do you see Modi playing this one out? Do you think that India will be able to avoid these tags? How do you see Modi striking a deal?
India's tariffs are seen as on the higher side by the international community, Europe, US, Australia, and other countries
Right.
who are negotiating agreements with India, trade deals with India. In India also, in the Indian establishment also, there is a fair bit of realization that right now India is the fourth largest economy. It's soon going to be the third largest economy. So if you are aspiring to be the third largest economy, you cannot have a situation where you have high walls
Yeah.
and high barriers and be protectionist.
Yeah.
And you need to let foreign players come in. You need competition to create better goods for and services for Indians. So India will try to has to take that conversation first internally and have this conversation with the US, with the Americans, and sort of make them understand that we can reduce the tariffs, but we need to have it on a reciprocal basis.
Correct.
So you need to have moderation on both sides, and India also would like to have market access in greater market access in the American sort of market, just as Americans want more market access in India, more goods and all of that.
Correct.
So I think that will be a conversation that has to happen. And in the first Trump administration, first term, India and US did try to come up with a trade deal. It was negotiated, but it couldn't come to a conclusion. I think now the effort will be to revive the negotiations
Correct.
and launch talks so that they can come up with a deal where both sides benefit and both sides are able to bring down tariffs, both sides are able to gain market access in each other's countries, and that will be helpful for India as well as US. I think for President Trump, the bilateral trade between India and US of 200 billion, around 200 billion,
200 billion
US dollars,
US dollars.
190, but this year it would definitely surpass. So about 200 US billion dollars. I think India, there's a surplus in favor of India about 40 to 50 billion dollars.
Correct.
I mean, that irks President Trump that this much money I outgo to the Indians, whereas I don't gain in zero sum game. So I think that is something the Indians have to sort of address his concern that India is willing to give market access and reduce the tariffs, but India would like to gain market access to the American market, to the American consumer, to the American people. So I think that kind of a conversation has to happen between the Indian side, and I think this conversation I'm hoping, expecting that should happen during the meeting between the two leaders.
Absolutely. There has to be a fair play when it comes to tariffs so that the balance of geoeconomics is not skewed, as we see. Apart from that, moving on to China that we spoke about earlier. Now, Trump declared China to be a strategic threat and also a rival sometime in 2017, I guess. And obviously, India also has certain concerns regarding China. How do you see both Trump and Modi align their strategy with respect to China in this meeting?
Well, just to recap the history, contextualize this a bit, with the Obama administration, who were in power just before Trump's administration last time, they were still trying to make up their mind whether China, how to deal with China. So they had this concept called a pivot, American pivot, which was seen as sort of engaging with China but competing with China. That kind of ambivalence was there. Trump became the first US president to frame China as a strategic threat and a rival in 2017. And how did that happen? Former US NSA, who was Trump's NSA in 2017 to 2018, writes in his book that it was the then Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar who visited India, visited the US and said that and talked about China's aggressive behavior to the Americans.
Correct.
Similarly, when McMaster came and visited India, he met NSA Doval and Foreign Secretary Jaishankar and Prime Minister Modi. They all talked about China's aggressive behavior. He writes this in his book, At War with Ourselves, and that makes you understand that India's concern that China is a strategic threat really sort of was one of the factors that convinced Washington and the US administration back then under President Trump that China indeed is a threat and a rival. And this was being told to them not just by the Indians but by the Japanese, by the Australians, and they finally were convinced with China's behavior in the Indo-Pacific. By then President Xi Jinping was also much more in command, there was muscle flexing, and India saw China being very, very supportive of India on both the times when in 2017 Doklam border incident happened and then in 2020 when the Galwan standoff happened. At that time also, both times Trump was in power. And he was in office. So the Trump administration backed India to the hilt in both those times. And to top that, Trump administration was also very, very supportive of India when the Pulwama terror attack happened and the Balakot airstrikes happened in 2019.
Correct.
At that time also Trump was in power. So if you see Trump administration's track record, they have been firmly behind India when it comes to China and Pakistan. So there is an assumption here, an expectation here that the Trump administration will be as supportive, if not more, in this term as well. And the first signs, if you saw how Secretary of State Marco Rubio, his first order of engagement, his first plurilateral meeting after taking office was to have a meeting of the Quad foreign ministers.
Absolutely.
Which is what was revived by the President Trump administration in 2017. And so the first time he met all the Australian foreign minister, Japanese foreign minister, Indian foreign minister. And then the first bilateral meeting he had was with the Indian foreign minister, S. Jaishankar, followed by the Japanese and the Australian. The order is in that sense, but if you see, so that tells you the signaling, the messaging that the new US administration is sending to the world and to China, that I am with these guys, and also that the framing of Quad and framing of China as a strategic threat remains and continues. Yes, there has been concerns that Trump has lowered his rhetoric, his public decibel a bit, but he's lowered it. But so there is a concern that will that mean a change in policy?
Right.
But so far, indications are that that is not the case, and that is where India is hopeful that on defense relationship, on critical and emerging technologies, the partnership will remain between India and the US.
With respect to China.
With respect to China.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, Shubhajit, H-1B visas. I cannot let you go without asking you about H-1B visas. Do you think this meeting will have any impact, any good impact on the H-1B visas?
Well, Trump has been very supportive of the H-1B visas in the last, 3 months' time. If we look at this time frame,
correct,
since he got re-elected, at least twice he made statements, 2 to 3 times. Musk has been who is his close advisor now. He has been supportive of the H-1B visa program. So I don't see any reason for that to be restricted. But yes, they might address some of the concerns that it should only go to the high-paying jobs, and not to the low-skilled jobs, low-paying jobs, high-skilled but low-paying jobs. That is something I think they're struggling with.
Okay.
So we'll have to see that if they're able to address that concern, and maybe they make it a bit leaner. But overall, the American economy has benefited from these Indian skilled professionals,
definitely,
who have gone to the United States on H-1B visa program and have innovated, have added to the value of their companies, of the innovation ecosystem. And if you look at any of the big tech companies, which say from Google to Apple to Microsoft, everywhere Indians on H-1B visa are the ones who are the coders, the engineers, the people who are behind the scenes working on these issues. So I think that's also reason why India has very quickly agreed to taking back illegal immigrants, because they don't want them to taint the legal professionals, legal immigrants, and legally people who have gone legally on H-1B visa issues.
Correct.
So that is something I think India is very conscious of, very mindful of. That's why it doesn't want it to be tainted by these illegal immigrants, and that's why I don't see there should be a concern about the H-1B visa program in the United States.
Absolutely. So like Shubhajit says, that there shouldn't be much concern about the H-1B visas and the people who have relocated or gone to the United States legally. From there to the narrative of the illegal immigrants and their deportation, of course, the tariffs and how that entire dynamics of imposing tariffs on India and how India reacts if PM Modi is able to strike a deal, and of course, how to deal with China. These are the major factors, these are the major things or priorities that would be on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's agenda as he visits US President Donald Trump on the 12th and 13th of February. Of course, at the official YouTube channel of the Indian Express, we'll be covering it live. Shubhajit will be writing extensively on it, and you can read all his articles on indianexpress.com. I am Flora Swai, and viewers, thank you for watching.